The Discontented Ghost, Chapter 19. The morning was well advanced when I met Lady Eleanor for our final tryst in the dense shrubbery near the family burial ground. She looked me up and down with admiring eyes. "Well, Simon, I must say, those clothes become you." For my departure, I had selected a conservatively tailored dark suit of contemporary design, such as any well-bred Englishman of that day might have worn when traveling, so that if anyone happened to glimpse me along the way, I would not look out of place. "Well, I must say your frock becomes you too, Ellie," I responded. "I am thankful my last sight of you does not have to be as Mrs. Umney." "So am I." I began to feel ill at ease, the way one does during the final moments on a train platform. "Well, Ellie, I'll miss you. It's been a real pleasure lately, especially last night, like old times. I mean, like when we were first. It was lovely. Speaking of which," she murmured, and brought forth from its snug nest in the bosom of her frock a small black book. She looked at me with steadfast eyes. "I'm sure you won't want your special dispensation to go to waste, so this will help you keep out of trouble. Our witch's code forbids us to be jealous or possessive. Share and share alike is our watchword. So I have prepared a list of names and addresses of some of my more attractive sisters for you. I'm sure they'll make you welcome." Now here was a prize any ghost fortunate enough to be in my position should have been willing to give his all for, and I knew it. And yet I had to force a lecherous smile onto my face as I accepted it. What was the matter with me? "Ellie, thank you," I said, oogling with hollow enthusiasm. "I'll give each and every one of them your regards, and I'll try to make you proud of me in every case." "I'm sure you will, Simon. Tell me, where do you plan to go first?" "Oh, I don't know. Anywhere but France. I thought perhaps I'd do a bit of Italy again, for a starter. Perhaps spend a day or two in Venice." With a self-conscious smile, I issued an invitation I strove to keep light and playful. "Ellie, why don't you take a vacation and come along? We'd have a great time." "I wish I could, but I can't." "Oh, you have to stay here?" "Yes." "Well, but for how long?" "For indefinitely." "Oh, well, I'm sorry. I'll miss you, I really will. And I will miss you, Simon." Her simple reply sent such a sharp twinge of pain through me that I quickly changed the subject. "Are the young lovers happy now?" She laughed. "Oh, yes. Wash and Sheila are floating around together, trailing clouds of bliss. The only condition she finally insisted on is that she will remain in service here until she's finished the library furniture. She's the kind that can't abide not to finish a job once it's started. Her father says she's always been that way. As for Virginia and Cecil, they've gathered together the family, including Lord Canterville, and are at this very moment revealing their great secret." I clapped a hand to my forehead. "Oh, damn! I knew I forgot something. I forgot to return Cecil's ring." "Never mind. I fetched it from your room and took care of it. Ellie, you're wonderful." When Cecil finally left his room this morning, I was on the watch for him. He was looking more pale and drawn than even Dr. Dobell could account for, so I knew at once what was troubling him. I curtsied and held out the ring. "This was found in the shrubbery, my lord," I said. "I think you must have dropped it there." Of course he was overjoyed, and at the same time turned quite red in the face. "Oh, how can I thank you, Mrs. Umney," he said. I borrowed it from an old aunt of mine, and I should have hated to, misplace it." I chuckled heartily. Young jackanapes. I wondered how he had managed a stone of those dimensions. Well, it certainly stood us all in good stead. I'm only sorry they can't know how really precious it is to them. So am I. I am really quite pleased with Cecil. He also thanked me very nicely for the chicken soup I sent up for him. From the house, the mellow-throated clock announced the half-hour, 11:30. Distinguished visitors were due at any moment now. It was time for me to leave. I glanced at Lady Eleanor and looked away again. It was all very well to change subjects and talk about other things, but I could not escape the thoughts that were really occupying the forefront of my mind, with steadily increasing cruelty. So now I cleared my throat and reverted to them. Listen, though, Ellie, there must be some way you can get away from this blasted place now and then, so that we can have a little get-together from time to time. Dropping her lovely eyes, she shook her head. No, Simon, I cannot. Then we will never see each other again? I'm afraid not, she said, and I could have sworn there was a catch in her voice, even something close to a sob. At the sound of it, everything became clear to me, about myself, that is, and I burst out in the wildest manner, but with complete conviction. Well, if that's how it is, then I won't go. Her head came up quickly at that. What? I won't go. I'll stay right here with you at Canterville Chase, and that's that. Simon, in spite of the minister and Washington and the twins and now Mr. Holmes, who may well put you in jeopardy? Yes, in spite of everything. Don't you see, Ellie? I can't leave you. Damn it, woman, I love you. Tears welled up in her eyes, but not even tears could dim them at that moment. She was suddenly radiant. And I love you too. Oh, Simon, you have done the one thing that could set me free to be with you. I stared at her, hardly daring to hope that I heard right. What? A little thing like that? 3 little words, as they say? 3 little words are nothing unless they are true, Simon, but it's plain you really mean them. I do. And you really mean that you can... Oh, Ellie. I clasped her close to me. Go get your things. We haven't a moment to lose. Rosy-cheeked and beaming, she pushed me away. I can't go this minute, silly. I have to round things off here in a proper manner as Mrs. Sumney. I'll have to give a month's notice, but after that... A month? Well, that's not too bad. Not half so bad as an eternity. There's something in that. In fact, actually, it might all work out very well. I'll go ahead and find a nice palazzo for us to stay in, and... I broke off to regard her with a fond twinkle in my eye, and took out the little black book. And by the way, I said, I won't be needing this. Lady Eleanor blushed. Our code forbids possessiveness, she reminded me, but I was hoping you'd give it back. At that moment, the clatter of a dog cart interrupted our raptures. The shrubbery prevented us from seeing it, but we could hear every word spoken by its occupants. Stop here, driver, cried a sharp, commanding voice. Here we are, Watson, and yonder stands the great family crypt of the Cantervilles. Notice the 2 sets of footprints, approaching and leaving the door of the crypt. One set, those of a man, the other those of a woman. Good Lord, Holmes, cried another voice. Can you see them from here? To the trained eye, Watson, such trifles are obvious. Less obvious, perhaps, are the curious imprints of 2 other smaller pairs of barefooted prints, which I now see may be added to our clues. I have no doubt that careful measurements of all these will afford us valuable information. Let us alight and have a look in there before continuing on to the house. We heard their eager footsteps approach the crypt, heard the door being tugged open, heard them go inside. I'm sorry to miss any of this, I whispered to Lady Eleanor. In fact, I hate to miss my own funeral. I console myself with the thought that poor Robin Clump will finally have a decent grave to lie in, and among his betters at that. However, I must be off. Be sure to get a word to me as to when you're coming, so that I can meet you with a gondola. From inside the crypt came a series of ahas, and observe these marks, Watson. A moment later, the 2 came outside. The jewels were there, Watson. Mark my words, they were there, and have only quite recently been extracted. Excellent, excellent. This case promises to be not without its interesting aspects. I shall be most eager to hear further particulars from the Lord Canterville himself, and here, if I am not mistaken, is our distinguished client now, and with him Sir Lansing Carruthers. Mr. Holmes. Now we can hear the voice of our lineal descendant, who seemed to be hurrying toward them. The ruby necklace has been found, and the earthly remains of the Canterville ghost as well. I have already deduced where the jewels were discovered, retorted the great detective. Would you be good enough to lead me to the dungeon where the bones were discovered? My word, cried Lord Canterville. Mr. Holmes, how did you know the bones were found in a dungeon? I should be glad to explain that, said Holmes, when we are on the scene. The men walked toward the house. I turned to Lady Eleanor and held up my arms. Now, I really must go. But it will be a long month. I can't wait till we're together again. We'll have a second honeymoon." "We certainly will, but you're quite right, Simon. We must stop dawdling here in the shrubbery like the children. I must change into my undies and return to my duties in the house before my absence causes comment." "Very well, then. Arrivederci, my love. Arrivederci, my sweet." Thinning myself out, I turned and sped away, round the rear of the family burial ground, across the park and down toward the lake. There I paused and turned back for a final look at the place that had been my home for more than 300 years. The great house basked in the sunshine. Lord Canterville, Sir Lansing, Holmes, and Dr. Watson were ascending the broad front steps that led to the main entrance, where the American minister was waiting. Mrs. Umney was stumping across the lawn with a businesslike stride that boded ill for malingering housemaids. One of those maids was behind a huge oak being kissed by Wash. She was standing tiptoe on one dainty foot with her other leg bent up behind her. Virginia and Cecil were trailing along behind the distinguished visitors, no doubt eager to see as much as they could of the famous detective in action. The morning sun flashed fire from a large brilliant object on Miss Virginia's left hand. Just as the men reached the entrance, Mr. Holmes clapped his hand to his neck and cried, "Ouch!" My glance shifted just quickly enough to observe 2 pea shooters being withdrawn from a sight in the large oriel window. I released a shout of laughter and flung up my hand in a warning. "Beware, Mr. Holmes, beware. I speak from experience, beware. You may have met your match at last." With a light heart, I turned away and set my course for Venice.